For a time, the Karazankor, the everlasting realm of the Dwarfs, was but a memory, a fool's hope, as civilization crumbled down upon their heads. That time is past. In this future, the grumblers stopped their grumbling, the old embraced the new, and Jaeger battlesuits marched to war. But it didn't stop with the Dwarfs. Spurred to new depths of depravity and ingenuity, the Skaven answer with their own abominations, and the conflict comes to a head at the Cavern of the Great Bat near Karak-Zord, a signal to all the realms that these kingdoms are ready for a higher form of warfare. It's Kaiju vs. Jaeger, technological marvels the likes of which this world has never seen before and may never see again. Can the Dawi cancel the apocalypse, or will it be a newer, deadlier, more terrifying Vermintide? On the Dwarf side, an expedition to the long-lost holds in the Southlands bore unexpected fruit. They found the STCs and stuff straight out of 40k, Doomfist Mechas, Jaegers, and the magic they needed to awaken the Rune Golems of old. So at least for this battle, they'll have monsters and monstrous infantry, steampunk contraptions, and stone-made instruments of war. And just like their people, these are sturdy, heavily armored walkers that will fight to the bitter end and rip through metal and flesh with minimal effort. The Rune Golems themselves have always been a contentious topic in our community. Some people feel like giving monsters to dwarfs is blasphemy, others want shiny new toys to play with, and an answer to their issues in combat. Regardless of where you fall on that spectrum, Rune Golems and Rune Guardians do exist in Warhammer lore. They just long ago lost the magic and skill required to awaken and control them. As you might imagine, their appearance here is a gigantic escalation of this bitter war, so don't expect any of these new units on either side to be particularly well balanced. Like in the case of this centerpiece, it has 30,000 HP and 150 armor. Gonna be tough to kill, as it unleashes rune magic to crack earth and sunder ratmen. Drills for excavating can just as easily be turned against flesh. Crank guns, steam gatlings, and incendiary ammunition can be turned against the ratmen as well, and their engineers are still getting used to all these new toys they have to play with. So as they pilot them into this new conflict, it's going to be interesting to see whether they can pilot them appropriately. If we can get a good camera angle here, might even be able to see them. I think you can, to an extent there. Anyway, big thanks to the Great Harmony Sentinel team and Rune Golem team for making this battle a possibility, and across the cavern come the perfidious Skaven, and they are even nastier nowadays. You've seen Pit Abominations, but have you seen armed and armored ones with guns and cannons and flamethrowers to boot? The Warp Flame A-Bomb can wade into melee, incinerating enemies and exploding anything that gets too close, while the Warp Grinder Kaiju can split the earth and cause earthquakes, snaring, slowing, and damaging the dwarves in their attempts to cut it down. Of course, it also has too horrible to die, so it will regen a lot during the course of a battle. And finally, the Gatling Mecha variant has a superpowered version of the standard Gatling gun fused to its forearm, forming more like a Gowite Avenger from an A10 Warthog. And it looks like it has two of them. Of course, still has the warp blades on the side, so when it wades into melee, armor-piercing action is what you can expect, and it will not be easy to kill, because it is more heavily armored than the Pit Abomination from vanilla Warhammer 3. Two rivals you know very well, deploy new weapons in an arms race that will turn them both into superpowers, at least provided the weapons actually function and have a chance to proliferate. Should be a good testing ground for them. I don't know about you guys, but I love monster movies. I absolutely adored Pacific Rim, just super entertaining. Don't talk about the sequel, obviously. So anytime mechas face down kaiju, it will at least pique my interest. So should be a good show in this one as the Doom Flayers make their move in the vanguard. One thing we will see more of from the dwarfs in this battle is a corresponding increase in friendly fire incidents. Might be channeling their inner Skaven in this one. When you give them big guns and maybe don't give them a whole lot of time to practice with them, there may be some unintended casualties, but the explosions in and amongst the front ranks of Skaven slaves as the Vermintide closes in should more than make up for whatever incidents may occur. Or at least, that's what they tell themselves at night. Steam gun from the engineer going to work here as the Gatlings fire down the flank. Pit Abomination with the dual rotary cannons, auto cannons, whatever you want to call it. Would love to hear that be a little bit punchier, but I don't know how viable modding sound files is, and that is the traditional Gatling gun sound. Not even sure it's possible to change that at all. Can you imagine hearing the from an A10 Gowite Avenger in Total War Warhammer 3? Would definitely be a bit more immersive than whatever plinking sounds we got from the Gatling guns in vanilla. Front ranks of this Vermintide have been utterly devastated already. Multiple units of Skaven slaves and clan rats routing after the blasting charges went off. The modder calls these mechas hate resolvers, so I guess they're channeling their inner malice Darkblade. Through hate, all things are possible, and my god, do the Dawi hate Skaven. Rune of Wrath and Ruin, in and amongst the Blight Scab's Plague Pack, doing some nice damage there, chunking them down and slowing their advance, while the autocannon Abomination just lets out a torrent of fire. Do not want to be caught in the midst of those volleys. Engineers moving in to fight the Blight Scab's Plague Pack, and Plague Sensor Bears are going to rip through them in seconds, while Ikit Claw, we haven't mentioned him so far, but it makes sense that he'd be in charge of an army like this one. When you see technological marvels on the Skaven side, it's usually him doing the talking, and he talks with Warp Flame, burninating the countryside, burninating the peasants. Pestilence Flail Infantry are already through the miners and looking to collapse through the center, leaving a hole in the Dawi line. One of the Rune Golems has retreated to get out of the cone of fire of all those Warplock Jezzails. Thorak Ironbrow's Rune of Doom activating map-wide, giving the Dwarfs their own non-heretical version of Wa, while the Golem of Karazorn lumbers forth into the fray. Warp Lightning, either from the ROR Hell Pit or from Ikit, missed everything as the Longbeards broke through, and on the Dwarven left, a huge ambush from the forest. Death Runners already siding through the back line, Doom Flayers breaking from the tree line and running down the stunties, and yet another Wrath and Ruin from the Rune Lord. Really well executed attack from the Thagaraki, but a nice counterpunch from the Dwarfs. Sensor Bears have been the target of much of that violence, but here come the Doomfist Mechas. They have armor sundering and bonus for large, meant to bludgeon down much larger foes. We'll see how they perform against the Warp Flame Hell Pit Abomination. Thorak Ironbrow is leading his own Warp Driller Mechas into the center of the Skaven line, and waiting for them is the Warp Grinder Hell Pit Abomination, and he will pop his Seismic Snare and contribute a lot of AoE damage. Maybe even more importantly, though, that Seismic Snare is going to prevent the massive Rune Golem of Karazorn from joining the fight, and the Hell Pit Abomination will have at least a 15-second period here where he doesn't have to go toe-to-toe, mano-a-mano with that gigantic Gundam. Meanwhile, the Skaven infantry are being bludgeoned to death by the hammers on these monstrous infantry, and the Doomfists are basically doing Gorich things here. They've learned a lot from the Skaven, apparently, doing their own 720 no-scopes, and a couple punches from those, we'll see a lot of these Plague Monk Sensor Bears explode into little giblets of meat. Hell Pit Abominations are looking very healthy at the moment, as are the big monsters for the Dawi. Rune Golem of Karazorn currently being focus fired down by the Warplock Jezzails of the Skaven, but they have a lot of HP to cut through. And meanwhile, the Doomfists are, well, they essentially have a full surround off on the Warp Fire Thrower variant of the Hell Pit Abomination. We'll see how things shake out on that front. That could get really interesting. They're actually bypassing the HPA right now and are instead coming to the rescue of the Dawi infantry, who will not be able to beat the Plague Sensor Bears on their own, despite the Sensor Bears being relatively depleted in terms of their HP and being the focus of all those Wrath and Ruin spells. But finally, the Apex Predator, the tallest geese, the Gundam of yore, has come to the fore, and he is going to start pounding this Skaven horde into oblivion if he's given any chance to do so whatsoever. 30,000 HP. He strikes an imposing figure for sure. Warp Flame from the Hell Pit Abomination will do its best to slow down this assault, but it will stride into the center of the Skaven horde and let loose with a disgusting bombardment. And those are essentially flame cannons in an AoE. And you might have seen his kill count skyrocket right there. Went from about 50 to 250 in very short order. And a lot of Skaven chaff just met their maker and will join the Great Horned Rat in the void. Master Rune of Immolation is no joke. Dude is straight up, he's straight up pooping on his adversaries. Flaming poops. We've seen it with the Phoenix, now we're seeing it with the Dawi. But the HPA, that thing, I mean, incredible model on it. The modder did an amazing job in bringing this bad boy to life. Obviously, the base model is already cool. When you give it armor, give it a bunch of robotic accessories, android appendages, I mean, it's going to turn into something truly special. And now this thing is just carving apart the Dawi infantry. But yet, the Doomfists are still there, and they might be able to get a full surround off on here. And more importantly, the other Rune Golem. The smaller variant of that is stomping its way over with the Great Axe and might have something to say. And we get a true Jaeger versus Kaiju battle here in a second. A lot of Warp Flame being spewed forth. The cool thing about those is they actually have a bunch of riders on the back that will fire as it charges into melee, so it's always shooting. A lot like the Dread Saurian in that manner, with the Howdah and the Blowpipes. Ikit Claw doing what he does best. He's actually on foot right now. Stepped out on the Doom Wheel and the Doom Flayer in this one. Just wanted to use the actual fire thrower and his cool, unique animations, I guess. And he's actually expended all of his ammunition, and he's done quite a number on the Dwarf Horde as well. Over here, Thorak Ironbrow taking on a Kaiju all by himself, and he is fighting the Warp Driller variants, I believe, while more drillers, the Hate Resolvers, with their own drills, digging deep into the Skaven Horde and sending a whole group of them packing, running for the hills. The Doom Flayers, I think, are mostly gone on the Skaven side, and they certainly have a lot more bodies on the field right now. Only a few stalwart groups of Dwarf infantry remaining. Rest of it belongs to the Vermintide, and bigger problem for the Dwarfs right now is that the Death Runners are in the back, so any Dwarf infantry that do round off won't be given the chance to return to the fold. So their mechas have to put in some serious work right now and potentially put the entire army on their back. Epic little struggle breaking out as the Skaven clan rats charge uphill into a torrent of Gatling fire. They're going to be able to close them down in melee, but nice thing about these mechas, the Hate Resolvers, they've got hammers for their right fist, and those can cause some serious carnage, as these poor Skaven are about to find out. Bigger problem for the Hate Resolvers right now is that the Pit Abomination and those Death Runners have just charged in from the rear. The Gypsy Danger and Slatter, Kaiju and Jaeger fight, gigantic creatures, abominations, and hunters all. I'm gonna be very curious to see who manages to win that fight. I think that in general that would probably favor the Hellpit Abomination simply because of the regen and that innate bonus versus large, while the Rune Golem has bonus versus infantry and lacks armor piercing, but it also has 800 weapon strength, so that could go either way pretty easily. I think the smart thing is probably with the Hellpit Abomination is just fight it until it gets low, then let Too Horrible to Die proc run away and come back a little bit later. Because that is one clear-cut advantage the Hellpit Abominations of the Skaven have. They're faster. They can easily outrun the Rune Golems and use their regen to just keep themselves in the fight even when they're only on slivers of HP. We just saw a bunch of the Hate Resolvers, the Gatling variant, start routing. They're going to be run off the map, but only a few will return, if any. And Dwarf Engineer is fighting Ikit Claw at the moment, and the Rune Golem of Karazorn does not like that. It wants to come over and help against Legendary Lord of the Skaven. Monstrous Infantry at the bottom of the screen, returning from whatever they were routing off the edges of the map, and they might be able to get a surround off on Ikit Claw here. Here comes the Death Runners. Nice focus fire now being directed towards the Rune Golem of Karazorn. So much HP to cut through, and not too much effort has been expended trying to kill it thus far. That will need to change as we transition into the mid and late stages of this battle, because if you don't shoot at it, you're not going to get through 25,000 HP. Cannot cut through that in melee, at least not without the help of all three Kaiju Abominations. Interestingly enough, though, the Rattling Regiment of Renown version has charged into melee, and I think you might want to sit back here and shoot into the beast, but perhaps if they can get another Hellpit Abomination coming from the other side and attack it from multiple angles, that might be one of the quicker ways, because then you could pin it in place and have the rest of your shooting take it down for good. Oh, these are brutal close-range volleys, and this is why you typically do want to chase off the important targets if you can. Hellpit Abomination might have been able to rout them off. Instead, you got some pretty brutal close-range volleys into the Warp Flame variant, and that thing is very low now. Thorak has popped his Rune of Doom for the second time this battle. Global ability for the Dwarfs, plus 24 melee attack, and can cause fear. But the fear element isn't going to be very important. The Hellpit Abominations do cause terror anyway, innately, and they're by far the most important troops left for the Skaven. So, as we said at the beginning, as we promised, it will be a Jaeger Kaiju monster mash moving into the late stages. Master Rune of Slowness on the Hell Pit Abomination, making it very difficult for it to disengage. Skaven do have some bodies remaining here, but not a whole lot. Frankly, the Dwarfs don't either. It's pretty much down to both Rune Golems, the Hate Resolvers, and Thoric Ironbrow. They've got a great surround off on this Hell Pit Abomination. They're sundering its armor. Another Seismic Snare and Warpquake from the Warp Driller. Will that be enough to save it? I'm not so sure. Even the Warplock Jezzails are charging into melee now. Those are the bravest rats I have ever seen. May we all salute them. They are made of sterner stuff indeed. That's just incredibly impressive. You never see that from the Thagaraki. Out of ammo and bravely charging into what is certain death. Meanwhile, Ikit Claw straight up styling on his opposition and one of his most hated rivals. The Stunty Grudge Gnomes will not live to see the morn. Not if Storm Demon has anything to say about it. Not if that wrist-mounted Warp Flamethrower has anything to say about it either. And he's backed up by a few Death Runners, which, as we know, are one of the best counters to Dwarf Infantry in the entire game. But they just routed off. They've had enough. They've done what they could. I think they have over 200 kills. They munched up the Dwarf's backline, but there wasn't that much of a Dwarf backline in this battle. Doomflayers are actually still alive. I thought they were gone, but they have returned to the fold, and now danger zone for Thoric Ironbrow and his Doomfist Mechas. Rune of Wrath Ruin will buy them a little bit of space as more Clan Rat summons appear behind them. I don't know if some of those are from the Too Horrible to Die proc. I think one of the Hell Pit Abominations is actually, yeah, one of the HVAs just died to the Rune Golem in the background, so that was a Too Horrible to Die, and the Plague Sensor Barrett just broke off. Thoric Ironbrow is on slivers of health remaining. Hell Pit Abomination right here is looking pretty healthy. That is the Warp Driller variant, I think. The Warp Flame one is gone, as is the Regiment of Renown version, the autocannon variant that's in the foreground right now, and that could spell doom for the Skaven, because the Rune Lord of Karak Zorn just came in with an RKO from behind, and that is a mass rout. With no more monsters on the field to anchor their leadership, army losses kicks in, and the Skaven will scurry back to their mountain abodes. Thoric Ironbrow and his special new Karak Zorn toys, well, they put in some work this battle for sure. One of the Rune Golems had 4,000 plus damage value, one with 69 kills. Nice silver chevrons earned, 351 on the Rune Golem of Karak Zorn, the big one, but a lot less damage value on that. Got some good Master Runes of Immolation, but didn't really get too many attacks in on the high value stuff. And on the other side, Ikit Claw and his Hell Pit Abominations. All armored, all armed to the teeth. They did what they could. They put in some work as well. But it seemed like that dwarf armored phalanx of golems and of Hate Resolver Mechas proved to be a little bit too much. And at least in this Jaeger versus Kaiju battle, it is all Dawi all the way. But a torrid affair for both, and Pyrrhic victory for the Dwarfs of the Karaz Anchor.